Welcome to Way Back When, Big Blend Radio's History Podcast. Today is Women's Equality Day. It is August 26th, and welcome to Big Blend Radio's Big Daily Blend Show, which is also part of our Women's Making History show and other shows on Big Blend Radio, because once we get one good topic, we go, it's got to go everywhere because we're the big blend, because one thing is connected to a bunch of things. One person is connected to a bunch of people. So that's the way life is. And so we're not very focused, are we? But we are actually. Today we're going to be talking about Sarah B Cochran, and we have Kimberly Hess back on the show. She is the author of the biography, A Lesser Mortal, The Unexpected Life of Sarah B Cochran, and it's quite a story. Sarah B Cochran is known as the Coal Queen. Now, I think many of us may go, oh, she was a coal queen. She brought coal to the country. Well, at that time, it was a very important thing. And her husband did a lot of that work. But what she did from his work is mind-blowing. So welcome back to the show, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
And am I right about that? The Coal Queen. Do you ever get people go, oh, we're talking about dirty coal, right? And
I've had questions about, the effect on the environment from when her father-in-law was in business. But at that point, coal was really the alternative fuel after charcoal. And so it was known to be a pollutant in the Pittsburgh area. But, there weren't as many alternatives as we have today. So, and this was around 1900, just to be clear, because Sarah lived from 1857 to 1936. So we're talking about, the late 19th century and early 20th century, which was very different.
And why was I thinking of her husband then? Why did I get that? Is that just a typical thing? Maybe.
Her husband was in the business before she was, because his father was a man named Jim Cochran, who pioneered the Connellsville coke industry and made enormous contributions to southwestern Pennsylvania. And then his son, Philip, who was married to Sarah, was leading the family businesses until an untimely death in 1899. And then Sarah and Philip's son passed away in 1901. So that left Sarah in ownership of all of the coal and coke businesses and some banking interests as well. And that made her an instant competitor of Henry Clay Frick's at the time, which was an era when women were legally barred from working in or around Pennsylvania coal mines. So it was an odd time to be a woman in business, which was considered a man's world, and especially in the coal and coke business, which was just not a friendly place at the time.
Can you go back on the coke business for new listeners and listeners that may not know what you're talking about? Because coke can go many ways.
Right. So coke is the type of coke we're talking about today is transparent to a lot of people because it was an input into the steel making process. So if someone owned a coal mine, they would mine their coal and they would keep some of it on site to use as their own fuel. They would sell some of it in the market as coal, but then they would put another portion of it into a series of ovens that are kind of like huge outdoor kilns, the size of a dining room or so. And this coal would be burned over the course of 24 to 72 hours. And the substance that's left is called coke, and it's almost pure carbon. And that was useful in the production of steel in Pittsburgh. So that was a very, very lucrative part of the business for anyone who was in coal mining. And that's where quite a bit of Sarah's money would have come from. And that's the industry that Henry Clay Frick ended up dominating in the Connellsville and Pittsburgh area.
Well, it's interesting because now they're talking about having more environmentally sound steel again. That's actually kind of the new wave now. It's going from carbon to clean steel. So that's kind of interesting. I just interviewed a scientist who was talking about that. I'm like, what you talking about? What do you mean steel is good? And he was like, no, this is the new wave. This is the new, it's going from one to the other, and that steel will be the next real savior of infrastructure, but it's on this other cleaner version of it, which I find fascinating
Yeah.
because and I want to also, before we bring our guests on, you've got some amazing guests joining us today. Um, also touch on this because we're talking about women's inequality and then we're talking about steel and we're talking about coal and everything that you have to understand that this was back in the day, right? You're talking
Hmm.
about, early times. And at that time, we didn't know really the environmental concern of that, right? We didn't, it helped people have power in their house. And that was like a godsend, right?
Right. It helped for heating. And I think some of the heating might have been anthracite coal in other areas, but bituminous coal from Western Pennsylvania would have powered ships and trains. It
Wow.
was used in heating commercial buildings. I know when Sarah was a trustee of American University, she donated a carload or two of coal for heating at American University. So it had all of those great uses at that time.
We got, as you know, Nancy and I travel full time. Nancy, everyone, my mom and co-host here and cohort and all kinds of things. We travel the country full time documenting parks and public lands, but going into communities, learning the history. And most of our parks and public lands have, I don't know a place you can go without history, right? So that's part of it. And I think we haven't really done your region quite well yet, Kimberly, but we're coming. We're coming for
Okay.
you. But we did go to Erie, Pennsylvania, and I found that to be really fascinating. And we went to this wonderful museum, and it really, I've always read about the Industrial Revolution and what happened in our country and Carnegie and all of that. And of course, Napoleon Hill and Henry Ford, all of those guys at that time, right?
Hmm.
But there was the Watson Curtsey Mansion, and we say this wonderful bed and breakfast. And right down the street is this mansion, right? And we go there and there's a museum, and it was right where the Erie Canal actually stopped,
Oh.
but doesn't now. It's crazy. You go in this mansion, which is now the museum. And by the way, it's Spencer House Bed and Breakfast, everyone. You got to go. But here we are in Erie, Pennsylvania. They've got one of the best beaches on the planet. And this is where, it's not a coast, it's the Great Lakes. It's beautiful. And the history is insane of your state. Your state, dang, man. I had no idea until we got there. I mean, what the battle, the War of 1812 and all of that. But the Industrial Revolution, this is where I really got a hold of it and how many cultures were connected, that diversity of people. I would go by diversity, I'm a park person, so I go right to nature, but the diversity of it, of how many cultures were connected to the industrial world. And we went in this museum and they had waffle irons. They had all these things that steel and iron were made and how they were shipped out to the rest of the West.
Hmm.
And I'm going, oh, we've always been on the west side of the country, learning all this, going, this is how the tented camps and mining camps got stuff. It was coming from you guys.
Hmm.
And it was just really fascinating to me about, we actually have to understand the history of America from the East going west in a weird way, other than obviously our indigenous people come first, right? Um, but I found that interesting. Do you think Sarah's work and her family's lineage affected what happened in the West and what I was just saying with that? Just understanding the magnitude of what coal and steel and everything did.
Yeah, I mean, the work that was being done in Western Pennsylvania in the coal industry in the late 19th and early 20th century was so impactful on the American economy. And I believe Pennsylvania was at one point producing more coal than what Great Britain was at the time. And the largest percentage of what Pennsylvania was producing was coming out of Western Pennsylvania. So it had to be useful and making an impact on that.
Mm, it's amazing. And now here we get Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
and she decides, well, I'm going to do good stuff, right? Did she she was like pretty much a big philanthropist. She's like, I'm going to change things. But she made some significant change in regards to, I'm going to have meetings and I'm going to get women together, even when that was kind of against society. Um, did people frown upon her, what she was doing, and that she wasn't keeping with social standards?
I think in some cases she wasn't accepted into society, but that was while her husband was still alive. And the reason for that was because she came from a very impoverished background. Her parents were farmers who might not have even owned the land that they were working on. And a lot of people, unfortunately, just continued to see her as being from this particular socioeconomic class, and acted as if she didn't belong in higher levels of society, even after she was married to a coal baron. I don't know as much about how they reacted to her suffrage activism, but I think it's interesting that she became a very public supporter of suffrage. In 1915, she opened her home, which is called Linden Hall, to host a suffrage rally that 500 or 600 people attended. And it got wonderful newspaper coverage before and after. The house was only a couple of years old at the time and was an enormous 30 plus room mansion on over 600 acres. And it had a Tiffany window that is just enormous. In fact, the Metropolitan Museum of Art just acquired it. So people were coming to this to find out about suffrage and probably to look at the house as well. But the fact that she was willing to do this publicly and to get PR in the newspaper in Pittsburgh and locally meant that she was letting everybody know how she felt about this. And that's very different than writing a check and just sending it quietly to a suffrage organization.
Yeah, here I'm gonna support this, but I'm anonymous. Don't knock on my door. Yeah, I think that's really huge about it. And so this brings us to Amanda, who's joining us on the show. And Amanda is the founder of the Justice Bell Foundation. And I find this really amazing when we think about it. I'm sorry, but I get excited about this when you think about women coming out there at times that maybe they didn't want to or didn't know, or you know what I mean? So I just, welcome, Amanda. How are you?
I'm great. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, tell us a little bit about what happened with the Justice Bell, like what was going on? The Justice Bell Foundation. Give us some history of this, because I think people need to know, because you guys are like one of the oldest states, right? And I want people to understand that too. So it starts trickling from there. And everybody, it's Amanda Owen, by the way. And Amanda, do you have a website for folks to connect with you?
Absolutely. It's justicebell.org.
Yes. So tell us about this, because the Justice Bell, this is a prominent thing, in our history. So yeah.
The Justice Bell was created as a branding tool in the fight for women's voting rights in Pennsylvania. And in fact, what Kimberly was just talking about in 1915, at the time of the suffrage tea, in late July in 1915, part of what was going on is in Pennsylvania, there was an amendment on the ballot for the November 2nd election in 1915 that would give women the right to vote in Pennsylvania. Back then, it was just a state by state thing. There was no federal constitutional amendment. So women in each state had to really fight for voting rights. And 1915 was that time for Sarah Cochran to create this suffrage tea in 1915 is incredibly noteworthy, because women throughout the state were doing everything they could to bring attention to the upcoming election, when men would vote on November 2nd, whether they would give or deny women the right to vote. So the Justice Bell which actually came through Fayette County, Sarah Cochran's home county there, in mid-July of 1915. The suffrage tea itself, I think, was on July 29th. But there were women from the Justice Bell Tour, speakers, especially from Fayette County, who actually left the tour for a short while to go to Cochran's suffrage tea. And so some of these suffragists actually made an appearance there, including Elizabeth McShane. And Kimberly, I looked further and saw that her mother and her sister were also at the suffrage tea.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and actually helping out.
Wow.
Elizabeth's mother did a whole lot to kind of do a lot of advance work to help out for that tea. Elizabeth McShane was a very important suffragist, not only in Pennsylvania, but later in the fight for the federal amendment that finally, gave us the 19th Amendment.
How did that help us nationally, do you think? When we look at the suffragist movement and even the word suffragist, isn't that kind of like a wild word? Like you just feel like suffering, like women were suffering. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And when you look at that word.
Yeah, suffrage is actually just kind of the right to vote. So, so that suffragists were people, both men and women, who advocated for the right to vote.
So it's not just female. So a suffragist could be like we talked about this on a show, like if someone was in prison in Florida, they couldn't have the right to vote. So they were advocating for that. So that would be a suffragist for the people in Florida at that time. I don't know where we sit on that right now.
The term suffragist really comes out of this period in the 19th century, early 20th century, and in particular with women's fight for voting rights, which was a huge grassroots movement that was taking place all over the country. And in fact, by 1915, the women in the Western states already had the right to vote.
Wow.
In another 21 states, women had limited voting rights, could vote on some things, but not other things. So in 1915 was this kind of huge movement in the eastern states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and New York, to try to get women in these four states the right to vote. And all four of those states had huge events and advocacy to push for to try to convince the men to give them the right to vote, essentially.
Oh.
And
that's wild that the West was like ahead. That's pretty interesting.
Yes.
But I think it's because those women marched across the states. They'd been in wagons and they've already kind of done this other exploration and went, you know what, y'all move over. I've got shotguns. I don't know. They've gone through Indians and stuff like that. They've gone through something in their family, right? You've got to think from the 1800s down of the westward expansion movement. Do you think that
Yes, I think
impacted that?
it was a very different kind of sensibility. Now, that said, California women didn't get the right to vote till 1911. So,
wow. Oh, that's kind of crazy when you think about progression in California right now, huh? It's always, wow.
So it was a real slog to try to convince men to give women the right to vote. And many of these referenda failed. And in fact, in Pennsylvania in 1915, the women lost in all four states.
Well, is it also because so many of the major companies were back east at the time? If you think about it too, there's a westward expansion, right? But then Carnegie and, we've got, Sarah's family, right? And everybody, these big conglomerates, which aren't like what we have now as big conglomerates, were kind of running. The DuPonts and everybody had all of that, right? Over there. So those were a lot of men.
There was a lot of manufacturing interests. I mean, the failure in these four states, the failure of men to give women the right to vote, there was a lot of um, um, there was a lot of information that if women got the right to vote, they would outlaw liquor, prohibition, uh,
Oh, yeah.
child labor.
Oh,
There were the men who thought women weren't smart enough to vote, but there were
ew.
definitely, large corporate interests that did not want to bring women, did not want to enfranchise women. So it was, I think, especially noteworthy that Sarah Cochran
Yeah.
kind of planted her flag, and said that she was supporting women's suffrage because, of course, women of means who came forward to help out in numerous ways, with this fight, really helped propel the movement, brought money and attention. So I think it was really wonderful of Sarah,
Mhm.
to advocate for
So,
women.
so do you think, Kimberly, that Sarah kind of cracked the nut of like, that's it, because she had that stature of the company, right? The
Mhm.
actual company, as a woman going, hello, boys, I'm here and I can run this ship too. And we're going to do things my way too, like
Yeah,
in that, like not just in her company, in her, family's company, but also like, hello, we've got to look at this. Like she really set a trend.
right. We don't have her words on why she supported suffrage, but certainly she was in a very male-dominated industry at the time, and she had to realize that any of her employees and competitors were able to vote in ways that could influence public policy, and
Mm.
she couldn't. She was also on the board of American University at the same time as William Jennings Bryan, and he had already been Secretary of State and had run unsuccessfully for US president at that point. And they were peers in that boardroom, but not at the ballot box. So that had
Ooh.
to have occurred to her if she didn't already support suffrage on her own. I mean, the other reason that has crossed my mind, but it's more of a stretch as to why she might have supported this, was that her Herbert ancestors were from New Jersey. And in New Jersey, from about 1776 until the very early 1800s, women could vote if they met certain property ownership requirements, and I believe were unmarried. So, I wonder at times how far back she knew about her own family, and whether there were stories that were told or any memory of that might have influenced the way that she was brought up and what she
Wow.
just believed.
Well, I find this fascinating too because of Susan B. Anthony. When people kind of freak out, like Susan B. Anthony was a Republican, I'm like, yeah, well, industrious, like capitalism doesn't mean that you don't care, right? So that's why
Right.
I say, like, here on Big Blend Radio, both sides there should be more than two sides anyway.
And I think, and that's an interesting point, because growing up with Sarah Cochran's story and the story of other women in my family, I've always associated capitalism and feminism and philanthropy. You can't have one without the others in my mind. And I've found over time that other
mm,
people don't necessarily see it that way. But to me, it's just so clear that, you can be a capitalist who looks out for other people and for the advancement of women, whereas other people may not see it that way.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. You did that perfectly because it's like, oh, if you care about this, you must be this. If you care about that, and we've gone a little crazy,
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, listen, I do love cats. I just, and you shouldn't be attacked on being a single woman who doesn't have children with cats, whatever. It's insane now. That's a
Well,
level we've gotten to. And I think when you think about the days of, Sarah Cochran and Susan B. Anthony and everything, it's like now everybody's, taking crap shots. And I want to say, like, Susan B. Anthony did stand up, and so many women did, of all different walks of life,
mhm.
and I think we need to unify on that level. And as women, this is a very important conversation of supporting each other because women did not have rights for many, many years. And we still are kind of like in a weird zone on that. And those rights can always go away if we do not always stand up and stay strong and honor those who have actually walked the really hardest part. Right.
And
So I think
I think women have to be in a position to define themselves, not have other people define who they are and what they're supposed to do. And at the time of Sarah Cochran's suffrage tea, the anti-suffragists in Western Pennsylvania were using the argument that if women got the right to vote, they wouldn't cook anymore. So suffragists took this up by writing cookbooks to show that you could still be domestic if you had the right to vote. And at Sarah's particular event, the meeting itself was called to order with a potato masher as a gavel. And someone actually said, this is to show that enfranchised women will still be domestic. And it's so absurd when you think about it, you know, for the idea itself that had to be said. But it was also being said in this 30-plus room mansion where there was probably kitchen staff, and the woman hosting the party didn't even need to boil water if she didn't want to. I mean, you know, and this is to introduce Anna Howard Shaw, of all people. But it's just a very interesting way of looking at how people defined women at that time and what arguments they would use for and against suffrage. And that was just one of them. There are some other interesting arguments on both sides that I think Amanda mentioned earlier. But anytime I see a potato masher now, I think of Sarah Cochran and Anna Howard.
That is so interesting because I have an artist that had a masher in one of her paintings, and now I'm going to have to go ask her about it. Yeah, it's weird, but it's cool. We do have two men on the show that have been quiet as we all talked, and I didn't do that on purpose. We have two wonderful gentlemen joining us. We have Bert Sessler, who is the organist at Asbury United Methodist Church in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, who has the great honor of playing this beautiful pipe organ. We also have David L. Woodrum, who's joining us. He is an alumni historian from the fraternity house. Wait, I've got to get, is this the West Virginia Alpha chapter? I didn't make sure on this, but I'm going to bring David on first because, you know, I want to talk about this organ so much because Sarah donated this organ to this church, and Kimberly's been posting photos on social media, and it just drives me bonkers because I have a thing about pipe organs. They're so beautiful. But David, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm fine, and thank you for inviting me onto the show. As I said earlier, please forgive my voice. I'm suffering from allergies, and it's affecting the voice.
Well, I think you need to have some hot tea and honey, and Sarah would have made you some if possible. But you sound great. I'm really glad to have you on the show. Tell us about your connection because of the fraternity house, and, you know, being a historian. And this is the West Virginia Alpha chapter, right? That's connected to Sarah.
This is West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia. The fraternity is Phi Kappa Psi fraternity. It's a Greek collegiate fraternity. Sarah's son, their only child, Philip, was inducted into the fraternity in 1899, a couple years before he died, at the University of Pennsylvania. And when he died during college days, it affected her greatly. Anyway, she had a real affinity for the fraternity and was a frequent donor to Allegheny College and the fraternity there in Meadsville, Pennsylvania, as well as West Virginia University and the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity. The story goes that in about 1890, the Reverend Aaron Moore Buchanan, who was the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Morgantown, approached her and said to her, "We would like to get a chapter house for the fraternity." Now, Phi Psi was the first Greek organization on the university's campus, and she, through her donation, they purchased a house at 480 Spruce Street, which was next door to the First Presbyterian Church. And that became the first fraternity house or Greek house on the university, on West Virginia University. The later on, in the late 30s, she also donated money, which went towards the construction of a new fraternity house. It's the Southern style with big columns and two-story house with plus a basement, and on top of the hill overlooking Morgantown. I mean, it's very, very dominant, very predominant. But the chapter had named the house down at 480 Spruce the James Cochran House, and the house corporation that runs the current chapter is known as the James Cochran House Association.
Wow.
And she and there is a portrait of her in the fraternity house that was donated upon her death. But she was very generous with the fraternity. They adopted her almost as the mother for the chapter. They would actually get in the car, and you have to remember there were no interstates in these days, so the roads weren't that great going from Morgantown to Dawson, Pennsylvania. But they would drive up there and spend the weekend, and she would open her house to them. And they talked, and Bert, there is an organ in the Linden Hall.
I've played it many times.
No way.
Yep.
And they used to gather around the organ and sing and to her. And she was a big believer in singing. And there's even a letter that she wrote where she basically urged young mothers to have their children play instruments because that was the best way to keep the family together. And again, this is before the days of radio and television. So
but the arts have always kept the true history too. Wouldn't you say, as a historian, that the arts have told the true story? Because at one point the newspapers were just, yes, telling the truth, but sizzling it up as well, in that, like, we need to sell newspapers, but the arts were telling the angst of the people and telling the it's like you can listen to music, you can look at paintings and go, this is what was really happening. This is how the people felt. So in a way, she's right of that, because it does tell what's going on, and it does bring unity, of course.
And in her philanthropy, she was a great supporter of the of education, particularly. And I think, Kim, she even underwrote college education for one of your relatives, as I
Yes.
remember the story.
Yes, my great-grandmother.
Whoa, really?
And she did this for not only for women, but also for men, if she thought they showed promise in the area. But she underwrote the chair for the college, the School of Philosophy at Bethany College, and Bethany is not too far from Dawson, Pennsylvania. It's actually in West Virginia. It's the first college in West Virginia. It's in the northern Panhandle, just outside of Wheeling. And of course, in those days, it was still, it was in West Virginia. But when Bethany was founded, it was the first college in what is now West Virginia.
Wow. So I want to go to you, Kimberly, on this. With her dedication to education, right, Sarah? She was a big believer in that. That's the first thing, I think, when we first talked to you a few years ago, when you first wrote the book. Again, everybody A Lesser Mortal, The Unexpected Life of Sarah B Cochran. It's on Amazon, all those great places. But it was the education thing that really drew me into that, because it was so important that women got education. And as I recall, she didn't kind of have a, like, you can only be a nurse kind of thing, because even into the 70s and 80s of our country, 1970s and 80s, we were still being kind of pulled back a bit, you know, 40s and 50s definitely, but depending on where you lived and what your background was, family wise, you were still like, you can only be a teacher or a nurse, which I think are both amazing careers, by the way. So not saying no, but that was like it for women if you
Right.
wanted to have a career. So it seemed to me that she was a little bit beyond that, that you could do what you wanted.
Yeah, I don't know what different courses of study people pursued when they were financed by Sarah, because one of the difficulties we have is identifying all of the people who she actually put through school. There wasn't a foundation, so there aren't documents available somewhere about this, and her documents, if they exist, would just be scattered, and that's extant documents. So I know that my great-grandmother was going through school to be a teacher and went to the Pennsylvania State Normal School at Indiana, which was a distance away from Fayette County at the time, and would have been a big deal to leave home and go that far away. And she attended for 2 years and then got a job teaching after that. And I've always thought that Sarah was supportive of education because her family seemed to value it. She and her sister had to share one dress, and each would go to school every other day in the same dress because they were so poor that they couldn't afford very many clothes. So I think they were very dedicated to education and seeing value in it for other people. And one of the things that struck me was that, you know, for someone who didn't have a lot of education herself and whose money and power, you know, really did originate with her husband, she wasn't telling women, especially, that they should just go out and get married and everything would work out for them. She was really preparing them, and also preparing men who she put through college to take care of themselves and giving them power rather than expecting people to be dependent on her or on someone else. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Wow. I love that. I love that. I was going to go back to you, David, with that in what was going on in education at that time for women.
Education at that time was were a lot of smaller schools, like Allegheny was small, Bethany was small. Another school that she supported was Otterbein College in Otterbein, Ohio. But she also supported construction of dormitories and school buildings. The Cochran Hall, even today at Allegheny, was funded by her. But education in those days was more liberal arts as opposed to the specialties that we do today. I mean, now liberal arts is kind of fading into the background, and people don't get the education, the general background education that is so important. The focus today is what's going to get me a job. You know, is it business, finance, public health, medicine, whatever. In those days, it was a study of the classics, and that was the predominant form of education. And remember, a lot of people in those days, and I'll use West Virginia University as an example, a lot of people coming to the university were not prepared. There were preparatory schools. And West Virginia University had a preparatory school that you had to go to for a year or two, which we now call high schools, basically. And you might have someone 20, 21 years old in prep school before they could go to the university. But most of it was Greek studies, you know, Latin, the great classics and so forth. and that was considered. And if you studied for the law, you read books and then studied for an exam. Same with medicine.
Yeah. A little different now, but that's weird. With medicine, you had to do. Wait, you just did books for medicine, not like patient testing?
A lot of that actually came from Europe. In Europe and Germany, particularly, the science was what was the greatest. But in the United States, in 1912, we had a report called the Flexner Report, which basically sided with the idea of allopathic medicine, which is what we call MDs today, and science, things like podiatric medicine, osteopathic medicine. There was medicine based on magnetism. There were a lot of very sketchy kinds of theories that were in place. All that was very prevalent in those days, and you could be a doctor literally by hanging out a shingle.
A snake oil salesman, right? So what about women in wanting to be in the medical field at that time? What would that be like?
The best they could do, and really during the Civil War, the idea of nurses, women being nurses, there was they kind of lost social status. They weren't,
and we did have nurses in the Civil War, and even World War II. I mean, World War I, there were women that went across the world. I mean, went from America to Italy. I mean, and just they were medical nurses, and they stayed in places that were worse than being in a foxhole, and served our world. Literally, when you think about a world war, they served not just us, but the world. And
too,
it was amazing.
When the men went off to war, the allopathic physicians, the MDs, went to war, and who were left but the women and osteopathic physicians. So the women came out and worked in industry, and that's actually how health insurance started, was the women demanding the ability to have coverage for their children. And of course, there's a wage and labor board in place that froze wages during the World War II, but they did allow health insurance to be by the company, and the premium paid for by the women as employees were tax free, and that was revolutionary. But that continues until today.
Wow. This is amazing history for us to all think about, So we've got what was going on with women. I want to go over to Bert, with the organ. Tell us about this pipe organ, because I think, is it when I think about a church, right? When you get a pipe organ, I have a friend who is putting in a fine art museum in her community that is an art town. But when she puts this fine art museum, and she's rallying everyone to work with her to do this. I mean, this has been the project is an ongoing, it's insane. It's huge. And she goes, you can't be an art destination unless you have a museum, a true bona fide fine art museum. That's what's going to be. And there isn't one in her entire region.
Oh.
And so when I think about a pipe organ, I kind of feel like it's a calling all to everybody. We've got the Lord here. It's here. It's kind of like we're serious about God now. And
well, that's right.
If you can't sing well, the organ will take care of it.
Well, you can sing well, and there'll be people that show up and sing well and stronger, and not as well and not as strong. First, I want to mention, you mentioned Watson's Mansion up in Erie. If you were up there on June 11th for the 7th annual Women Creating a Legacy at the History Center, my wife Valerie was at that event.
Oh, wow. So
So
you know what I'm talking about. That place is
yeah,
insane, right? The
yeah,
history there.
I have cousins that live in here. And for everybody listening, I'm in southwestern corner of Pennsylvania. I'm south of Pittsburgh. Well, actually, Sarah Cochran's house would be south of Pittsburgh, and I'm a little bit further south than that. Almost down to Morgantown, where David is with WVU. But yes, the organs.
So where are you guys all compared to like Carlisle and stuff? Like I just did an interview on Cumberland Valley, and then we did
Yeah, that's eastern.
Lehigh.
That's further to the east. Kimberly Press is when she goes from here back to her house in New Jersey. She goes through that area about the middle of her trip.
Oh, okay.
And
So when we were in Easton, Pennsylvania, we went over a bridge by accident and we ended up in New Jersey. No?
so you were probably in Phillipsburg.
I don't know. We just wanted to get some wine. And apparently that was on the other side of the bridge. I'm just telling you the truth. We wanted some wine. But they have Easton, Pennsylvania has to have one of the best graveyards or cemeteries on the planet. Like it is, they have so many historic, noteworthy people and so many people. I mean, I don't care like about, no, it's amazing. History lovers, go to Easton, Pennsylvania and go to that cemetery. It is amazing. I don't know if it's a cemetery. There's a kind of a little church. There's a church there, so it could be a graveyard, right? Cemetery is not, I don't know which one is which.
They usually go together around here. There's a lot of older churches with cemeteries.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little one and then it's attached, but then it got big. And that, all I can say is go there. It's amazing. Like the godfather of bandstand music is there. All of it. Like one of the oldest actresses in silent films is buried there and all over. Everybody's spread out and it is just, well, anyway.
A lot of famous people from,
can I just say your state's history is so cool.
We could spend an hour or two just on that.
I know. I'm serious. Like this is dangerous. But
right.
Anyway,
let's go back to where you were with the organ. So if you were alive, 105 years ago or more, you generally wouldn't have had an orchestra. You wouldn't have the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. It was very small compared to what it is today, or the Philadelphia Orchestra. You would have had a town hall, and there would have been a pipe organ in the town hall that you would have went to listen to the newest music. This not unlike what the symphony would play, the new symphony pieces. Back then you didn't have that. You had a big pipe organ in the town. Many towns had these. Theaters had them for the silent movies, but and a good example of this, I want to do this one. The William Tell overture that you hear when the Lone Ranger comes on at the beginning of when that came out, you wouldn't have heard that as a symphony playing it. You would have heard it on the pipe organ in your town at the town hall.
Wow.
So,
this is the history of the pipe organ. Like that came first.
That's what you would have had. And of course, churches won.
And so that means you were before the Beatles.
Yeah, well, way before the Beatles. That's right.
I'm just teasing.
But these pipe organs, that they were used as the king of the instruments, not just in churches, but towns owned them, and there are some towns that still have them in the movie houses. We had one in town here, the State Theater, and she had one at her house. She had an Aeolian pipe organ. So the house, and Kim has got to keep me straight on this. The after she died and everything. Is it the United Mine Workers or the United Steel Workers bought the property?
United Steelworkers.
Okay, so the United Steelworkers came in and bought the property that has her beautiful mansion on it, and they were putting in a golf course, and they put in a restaurant with meeting rooms and party rooms, and I've played wedding receptions there. I've hauled my Hammond organ up with the 760
I love
and the PA system, so I've played there for events at the country club. when the union came in to build their country club and build the golf course on her property, they got plans. The original plan was to demolish her house. And they actually brought the heavy equipment in to demolish the house, and somebody had the sense about them to ask on up the line. It's the way my father would tell this story, that, hey, this is a beautiful, beautiful mansion. We shouldn't be destroying this. And then they decided not to destroy her house and build the country club restaurant and everything on away from that house. So that was, and I don't know what year that was. I'm sure Kim knows the year. But this was, and my dad being in the insurance and real estate business, and his father also, they were interested in the real estate deals of the time. And that's how that mansion was saved. And it still was used for Christmas events. There were buses. They have coach buses full of people that would come in at Christmas time. They'd have the whole house decorated to the hilt, beautiful Christmas decorations. And in that hall, in the main hall, it was almost like a ballroom. That's where the Aeolian pipe organ. That pipe organ at her house was older, and it's not as big as the one at Asbury Church. But I would go up there and play it at Christmas time for those events of these busloads of people coming in from out of town. And this is 25 years ago now, I think, since the last time I played it. But yeah, that was it was very nice to go up there and experience the grandeur of that house. And here in Uniontown, we had J.V. Thompson, similar to in Pittsburgh, Henry Clay Frick. These were men in the coal business. And he would have had to have been a strong person to be in her coal business with these people, because they sometimes were not very kind, and she was very kind. So of all the things she did with her interest in music and wanting to promote it, she was very active in the United Methodist Church, and she built the church in Dawson. And she put an organ in there. She put organs in other churches around our area.
But even if it wasn't Methodist, or was it always Methodist?
Well, I can't tell you what the breadth of the.
I mean, I just kind of feel like she was kind of like, let's all get together. Like, you know what I mean? It was like humanity. I think she was humanitarian. Asbury, you keep saying Asbury. So when we were in Erie, we went to Asbury Woods. Where's the Asbury word coming from?
Francis Asbury was what they call a circuit rider. When they started to populate Pennsylvania and they worked their way out west, they didn't have churches, and he was a preacher on a horseback is what it amounted to. And he would visit town after town, and he would help. Would be like Billy Graham having a crusade. You know, he would come in and preach.
Like in the Southwest, we had Father Font and Padre Kino that did the horseback through as they did their expeditions.
And he would start them planning on building a church or building churches. And he visited hundreds of towns. And that's Asbury that the namesake is. This would have been 225 years ago.
So this had nothing to do with location. It was just like that's where he went, and he said, "Build a church here. I'm going to help you," and then move on and go to the next.
Yes, he went everywhere.
I think we saw that. I think we were in Illinois recently, where we saw somebody. I can't remember the name. And I went, whoa, what's he doing? And then this dude was here, and they named a park after him. So now we're like rabbit holing. You know, Big Blend Radio is nothing but a big rabbit hole. That's it, you know, and that's what history is. It's like you find out someone's name. And I really implore our audience, like, if you don't go rabbit holing like we do, you go to a park and you see a bench with a name on it. You see a fountain with a name on it, a street name. Like Asbury. When you just said Asbury, I'm like, wait, we went to Asbury Woods in Erie, and now you're talking about Asbury in a different place. Let's go find out. You know, do it.
I guarantee you that Kimberly has Asbury churches out there in New Jersey, or not far.
Do you, Kimberly? What's going on?
Yeah, we probably do. I've never actually looked for an Asbury church in this area, but I'm sure we do.
I go to Avalon, New Jersey, sometimes in the summertime. I drive right by one.
Yeah. Now, Kimberly, would you say that you went down a rabbit hole?
I tried to confine the number of rabbit holes that I went down, just by kind of defining what the research would be on at the beginning. Otherwise, you can end up going down many, many different rabbit
that
holes and following many threads, and it
I
would
have
take
to ask
years.
Amanda the same thing. I mean, that's going to be hard with all the women, right? Do you go down rabbit holes?
Yes. I mean, I went down a rabbit hole 8 years ago when I saw a little teeny mention about the Justice Bell, and now here I am all these years later. So,
Wow, it's
definitely.
amazing.
Now I just want to, and I know you edit this. I put in the chat. I have to leave at 7:50.
Yes, we're all ready. We're all going. It's all
good. And I apologize.
No, we're all good. We're all good. But
Okay.
listen, I think it's awesome that you have done rabbit holing. And I think that's what this is all about with history is rabbit holing. And that's what we want people to do. So we find out how humanity is. People do things for all kinds of reasons in life, right? And I think a lot of good comes from it. And then there's a lot of hardship. There's some negative stuff that none of us want to see, but we have to, you know? So in that, we're at the end of this show, but closing up, I wanted to ask everybody, just one woman, when you think about the suffragist movement, when you think about Women's Equality Day, just a closing statement or thought, someone who inspired you. Obviously, Kimberly went down a big rabbit hole, and Kimberly, Sarah was a relative, or is a relative, right? Not was,
Right.
is. I mean, she's passed, but so we want to go through that. So I know, Amanda, you need to leave. So why don't you start with that? Tell us,
Yes. I mean, I'll start with, and it's definitely hard to choose, but I'll point out that a woman named Catherine Wentworth Ruschenberger from Chester County, a woman of means, is the one who put up her own money to create the Justice Bell, the 2,000-pound bronze bell that was an exact replica of the Liberty Bell. She paid $2,000 at the time for that bell, and another couple of thousand for the motor truck that would carry it. And she, at 62 years old, was with the Justice Bell tour for much of the time over dirt roads in the humid summer, just to get out the message about women's voting rights. And so I think of her a lot, of like Sarah Cochran, what women of means who didn't have to step up and fight for women's rights. They had a little more privilege, but they did anyway, and they made a huge difference by doing so.
Yeah. And they had reputation to go over, right? That was the other part of it. You could have the money, but you had reputation, right? You had social status. And when you made a choice, you made a choice. And once you make that choice, you ain't going back unless you now became like, no, that doesn't work for it. You can't go back, right? Unless you made a huge mistake and then you have to say, oh, I thought this, but not, right?
These were women who were very, very committed. So nothing was taken lightly. I mean, they put their all into this movement.
This is not a Instagram reel selfie kind of like, oh, la, la, la. And then like you hope somebody, you know what I mean? It's not that of today.
No, not
this is real. This is real deal. Like you sunk your claws in, literally.
Yes. Exactly.
Wow. Thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Give everybody your website again. Give everyone your website.
It's justicebell.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And don't be a stranger at all.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to go over to David. David WOODRUM, tell us a woman or a story or something of like actually moving forward as we are. We're progressing a little bit, but not really. We're in an interesting perspective. You've done so much in history of women and, even looking at colleges, which I think is fascinating because that's where things happen.
By the way, just to follow up on Asbury, now I'll come back to the colleges. He was the bishop of the Methodist Church And after the Revolutionary War, he was the only Methodist minister left from Britain in the United States. And he's
Wow.
that started the Circuit Riders. And the Circuit Riders came to Morgantown in approximately 1772, something like that.
Look at this, Kimberly.
Look
what you just started now.
Yes.
See?
And their route would go from Morgantown, Fairmont, Morgantown, up into southwestern Pennsylvania, including Uniontown and on up.
Wow.
But
Wow.
and there are Asbury churches in West Virginia.
But you got to think about them, how they traveled back then, right? And it's not easy terrain.
It was horseback.
It's not, yeah. And you got to think about Pennsylvania has 4 real seasons and beautiful ones, by the way. But like when it's cold, like I'm getting out, like, I've done your state in all 4 seasons and it's beautiful. But like, hello, on horseback? No, you can keep it on horseback in certain seasons. No,
Yeah.
So, they worked hard, to do what they did. So that's amazing. So David, yes, come on.
Anyway, in terms of Sarah Cochran,
Yeah.
in when she died, her estate was considered to be very large. Her single largest bequest was $100,000, which went to Allegheny College. Now, again, remember, this is $100,000 doesn't sound like a lot today, but back in those days, that would have been significant. Our chapter of the fraternity received $5,000, and the University of Pennsylvania chapter, where her son was, received $1,000. I don't know why one versus the other, but she was a big supporter. And one last thing about her, and here is the mothers and the fathers in the early days when she was in the early 1900s did not want to give up their children. Much like today, we call them helicopter parents now. But they formed a club, a women's club called the Sarah B Cochran Club. And there was a chapter in Morgantown, one in Fairmont, which is 18 miles south of here. And they would get together on a monthly basis and they would work to raise money to do things for the chapter house. They would, one time they were a sewing circle and they made tablecloths. Another, they came up with money to provide china for the chapter house. So she inspired a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's huge that she showed you could move on. I'm doing this, but you can also do it in whatever way you can, right? It's kind of like, kids doing, well, I can't say lemonade stands because they get arrested now. You're not allowed to do it in certain places, but like bake sales and things like that you can do something to do good. No matter what it is, you can find a way, right? So it sounds like she instilled that belief into people in college that you can make a difference with whatever you have, no matter what you have or don't have, that you can still do it. That's amazing. That's amazing. Bert, I want to go to you.
Okay.
I mean, playing that organ.
Well,
Come on.
it's a
I mean,
wonderful
do you ever
instrument.
feel haunted by her? Like, do you ever feel like,
No, not and haunted isn't the word. There's a plaque up there
positive?
that I
mean
look
that
at
positive, nice.
in the choir loft there. I see the plaque where she donated the organ, and it was dedicated on February. It was Groundhog Day, February 1919. So the organ's 105
Wow.
years old, and there's a big blower motor. And you were talking about how pipe organs work. There's a big blower motor in the basement that blows air up into wind chests. And there's 3 different manuals, which are sets of keyboards, like 3 different pianos that come across, and then the pedals. And there's a room full of pipes for each one of those manuals. And then there's an echo organ in the back of the church up on the one side of the balcony, which has more ranks of pipes up there and chimes. And as pipe organs go in my area, it's my favorite one to play, but I've listened to more people that were organists that play it than any other organist has played it. That's what I say about it, because of the 105 years. I'm 63 years old, and my father went to that church. My grandfather went to that church. So I've heard organists play it all along. And we've had Fred Swan, played the organ at the Cathedral out in California. He was in New York City before that for years. He's played recitals there. Paul Jacobs, he's the head of the organ department at Juilliard. He's from Washington, Pennsylvania, by the way, but he's played recitals on our organ too at Asbury and Uniontown. So it's really a kick to be able to play it. But when I think of her, I think of how kind she was and how interested in music she was. If you and your family couldn't afford music lessons, or your kid couldn't afford an instrument, there were so many instances of her buying instruments for kids to study music, or anybody at any age that matter, if they wanted to get into music and they couldn't. I mean, of course, that's somebody that loves music and knows the value of it. So she was probably better known for that. I mean, that's kind of a philanthropy in music just on its own. But I think of that kindness, and I can't imagine a better person to have bought that organ for Asbury, and then I get to play it every Sunday. So yes, I don't think haunted is not the word at all.
No, I mean haunted. I don't think haunted is a bad thing. I just feel like you feel the spirit,
Oh, I feel like I get to carry on her memory there every week.
Okay. So have you ever been tempted to, or played, Proctor Harem's, we skipped the light fandango. I just want to know if you played The Whiter Shade of Pale ever on that organ.
Well, no, I have a cousin that played it at a wedding at that church for his sister, who's passed away now. But that's been played on her organ for a wedding, not for church, but for a wedding, because
I suppose
my cousin,
right.
She liked that song and he could play it, and it sounded really good on there. So
I dated a guy just because he could play it on an organ and do this. I know it's terrible, but
that recording, that was played on a Hammond organ. It wasn't even played on.
I know. But like, if you could think about going the next level, that would be it, right?
Well,
it would be like,
I guess you could think of it that way. Yeah.
I know, but a Hammond B3 is like still the thing.
Yes. Well, I think it was and I want to say it was an M100 that's on that Whiter Shade of Pale.
Oh, yeah.
No, you're talking to an organ fan here.
Yeah, I know. And I used to teach organ music. Yeah.
My claim to fame is I played piano with the Glenn Miller Band, but nobody knows who that is anymore. He was dead. It was younger people.
In the Mood. Dude,
In the Mood. That's right. Moonlight Serenade, all of that.
Yeah. Oh, one of the best songs ever.
My parents loved that music. And, and I will tell you this too. My mother was a school teacher, and she loved teaching. She was, she went to WVU. Well, she went to California University for a bachelor's degree, and then she went to West Virginia University for a master's in education. Loved teaching. And she taught in the elementary school that's very close to my house here. Now, I live in the house my grandparents lived in, and my parents. And when my dad married my mother, this is in the time, we're going back to the 50s, the 1950s. My dad asked my mother to stop teaching. And in those days, and it was because my dad was making good money. She didn't really need to work, but she loved teaching. And I know this because all through my life, I've run into students of hers that would talk to her, or we'd be out for dinner and they come over the table and, they throw their arms around each other and how are you doing? What are you doing these days and everything? And when I came around, I was born after all that. So when my mother was the happiest, I believe, in her life was when she was teaching. And, back in those days, apparently, how somebody would talk, Mrs. Sessler working over there. So maybe somebody said something, or my dad had that in her head, but he asked her to quit teaching and she did. And, today that doesn't mean anything. She could have taught, and that nobody ever would have even questioned that or said anything like. So I know times have changed here, so much from back then. And I wished she would have, because, I don't think I got to see my mom at her happiest. And I think that's when it was, when she was a school teacher and working and teaching for the love of it, not as
yeah. It's, and teaching, I talked about nurses and teachers being the first two things for women, right? And I think that's a natural for women.
That's what made me think of all of this when I heard you say.
Yeah. I mean, it's a natural for women. But at the same time, we can be all kinds of things beyond that. Some women, like, I don't want to be a nurse. I'm like, no, don't, but I actually could do it. I know it's kind of interesting. It's just, we as women want to be treated as actual human beings, just like we were like cattle, just like slaves at one point, right, Kimberly? That's the point of everything we're talking about today, is that women have the abilities just like men to, I mean, I fixed a car a little bit. Well, no, I didn't. I kind of fixed a car, but I was on the right track. I have fixed washing machines. I have done things that is all male when you go on there. And women now, we have women mechanics. We have women in the military. We have women in the Olympics. Look at Simone Biles. Come on, girl. So we've got to look at that women can do so much more, and teaching and nursing are, I think, actually our most basic instincts, actually. I think that's who women are. Like, that's who we are, but we can do so much more too. And some of us are more, there's some women I know that I don't want them to be my nurse. I don't want them to be my teacher, but I think we're kind of predisposed to that. I don't know how to explain it, but Kimberly, don't you think that Sarah saw that, like, we could be what we want to be? And she certainly stepped out.
Yeah, I think she definitely understood that women could be whatever they wanted to be and what people might not have expected them to be, just from her own career experience that I'm sure she never intended to have originally.
Yeah. I mean, she had to run a company. Like, here, I'm running a company. Watch this, boys. Yes.
Yeah. And I
will fire you.
Yeah. Yeah. She would have had to a way to navigate. She would have had to have figured out how to work with her own board of directors, which wasn't always easy in itself, and navigate competitors and politicians around the industry. Wow. So I think,
and her board of directors, that's going to be the hardest, because this was a corporation, right?
Right.
So at that time.
She had to fight her own board of directors after her son died to get her,
because they could take her out. They could literally take her out if she wanted. Almost like a nonprofit.
The largest stockholder in one of the companies and on the board of directors. But I think one of her concerns at that time was that they could take the business to Pittsburgh and she wouldn't be as close to it to know what was going on. So while they might have kept her on, they might be able to operate without her. That's one of the questions that's hard to answer unless we find papers of hers. How much agency did she actually have, and how did she navigate in the business world at that time?
Wow. Yeah. You went down a rabbit hole, didn't you?
Yes.
In closing, anything of hope for, like, women as we move forward from what you learned from Sarah?
I think I saw someone who could move past grief and continue to find.
That's a good point. Oh, wow. That's a huge thing. Can I just say that?
Yeah.
Let's just not forget she lost her husband.
And her son within 2 years of each other. And she went into philanthropy as a way to work through her grief, which I think is very impressive. That she did good things for other people and helped herself in the course of doing that. That, this is someone who was willing to share power with other women, was willing to lift up other people, and, moved forward with her life and with interests that she had. And I think that's very inspiring to see. And it was always inspiring to me to grow up seeing that a woman, and especially in my family, had this business career and had been on the same level as Henry Clay Frick and had done all of these things, because it made me grow up taking for granted what I could do. The problem is that not everybody hears these stories of historic female figures, and they don't give you credit for being able to do the things that you can do. So I hope as we share more stories of historical female figures, more people begin to understand how much women are capable of doing.
And
I
love it. I'm so glad you've been on the shows, like talking about her story more than our initial interview, a few years ago. And I'm like, oh, you got to come back on our shows. And I'm like, so glad, because I think you're inspiring other women to, like, we can make change. Yes. And I also think, I want to go, as we close up, Bert, don't you think as you play that organ, like, there's positive change can happen? Do you feel that, like, as you play music?
Oh,
like,
sure. Yeah. Music evolves over time.
You levitate.
We
levitation.
learn and build on things that are people in the prior generations have established, and hopefully we get better. There's sometimes that there's the music, there's such a broad spectrum. It's probably fashion is the same way. And I'm sure, like the media, radio, and now with the podcasts and things, this all this stuff is kind of fluid. It changes. And there's some great things that we don't want to lose the appreciation for, because we've built on those. And that's the case with Sarah Cochran. Now, Kimberly's book, I read the book, the Lesser Mortal book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And thank you for writing that and having a great history lesson for our area that will now be not lost to time. Yeah. And there's another book here that it talks about the coal business back then, or even before then. It's written by Muriel Shepard, called Cloud by Day. Cloud by Day. I don't even know if it's available anymore, but if you're interested in what Sarah Cochran's business would have been like in the rough and tough coal business of the time, before she got into it, that's a definitive book from southwestern Pennsylvania, the local author, similar to what Kimberly put together about Sarah Cochran's story. So that's the one thing I'd mention. But yes, music, beautiful. It's if you play, Lisa, this too, that your brain wiring, when you study music, your brain wiring is improved, and everything else you do will be better because of the time you spent studying music. I could go on a whole hour.
I haven't played organ for years, for like 20 something years, as you can tell.
Well, you should
from the but we do other music things. And honestly, what we did was we taught music to people who are retired, and we watched them go from losing. You talked about grief, and Kimberly was talking about that. We watched people go from grief from losing a spouse to having a community and moving forward. Because they had something else. Because back in the day, we're in a different generation now. This was
now you take your phone, you can put all your favorite music in your phone. You don't even have to learn
back
to play
then.
music.
But they used to be able to play with a finger and do this and that. But I watch people not get away from alcoholism and also use their fingers to get past going through a stroke. So, music is everything. Music means everything. It is our life memory. And I think that is what Sarah has given us with the pipe organ, is she created a sense of community of people coming in. That's what I was talking about with, you build something like a fine art museum. That's what a pipe organ does. It's like a calling to all people. We have this amazing organ. Come in.
If you talk about Sarah, you have to talk about the love of music, and you just can't. There was one time years ago, they asked me to talk at our library about Bach, and they said, and so you're a musician, you know about this, and they said, but I can't mention any church or religious. Bach was a church organist. That's what he wrote the music for. Yeah. And I told him, I went back to the library people. I said, I can't do this. I can't go in there and not mention that, because that's what he was all about. And the same way with Sarah Cochran, I think you have to that's part of her. And you have to look at the kindness in it. She's powerful, very powerful woman, would have to be in business. But boy, the music is certainly a kind thing that she shared like crazy in our area.
And it's called levitation. See, that's
yes.
what we call it in our rock and roll world here at Big Blend Radio. We call it levitation. I was in a blues rock band for many years, and I had a drummer that toured with John Lee Hooker and played with Moby Grape and Canned Heat and all kinds of Flying Burrito Brothers, all of them, right? And he would always bring in all this world music. And Nancy and I lived around the world, like Africa, and I lived in the bush with people playing the drums and singing at night, like real. And
well, I don't like to travel, but that's, to be able to play this organ in this town is a gift.
But it's called levitation. And he always said, Willie, rest in peace. He's passed now, but the drummer said it's levitation. That is the job of a musician, is to levitate the soul, whether they're passing on to the next level, if you're at the celebration of life, or, passing, however you want to call it. But levitation, that is the power of music. The blues is about getting out of how bad you feel. It's about levitating from that. It is, when you go to church, it's like gospel music is, hey, we want to levitate up. We want to rise above from whatever is going on in that day.
Agreed.
We want to be thankful. We want to be grateful. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care if you're a Buddhist. I don't care if you're a Hindu. All of the music, and he proved it to me. He played me all the different rhythms of and I know a lot of that kind of music. And I'm like, it is about levitation. It's about moving on up, not like necessarily JJ Dynamite. What is his name from Good Times in the TV show? But it is about moving on up. It is about levitating out of the feeling you're in, no matter what you're in. And I think Sarah B Cochran did that for people, whether it's a pipe organ or, hey, let's get together and actually have a vote. Mm-hmm. We're levitating ourselves. Yeah. That is what it is. I always talk about levitation and people look at me like, you're weird. Are you trying to be a Lemurian and beam up? No, I'm talking about elevation. You can do it. It's levitate up, move on up out of the situation. How are you going to do it? And most of the time, it is about mindset, soul set. The church comes in with that. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about, you go to church. I don't care. I've gone into just about every religion, like every kind of order of church. Let's put it that way. And it's up to you what you're going to take out of it and what you're going to do when you go in there. And it doesn't have to go with the exact laws of that church. It's about, are you going to levitate today? Are you going to rise above whatever is going on? Right? And everybody else has their religious order, and I'm all fine with that. And this is just me. It's about the levitation. Rise above. Rise above. That's it. And I think Sarah rose above. She rose above, and she didn't have to. That's the beauty of it. She did not have to do it at all. She could have just sat and said, hey, bring me the bonbons. She could have, and she didn't. And I think that's an example for all of us to really hone into. Anybody else before we go? I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to levitate right now. I don't know how to levitate quite that way, but Dave, anything on your side?
No,
he's
I'm
good.
fine.
He's levitating. He's levitating. We know he's beaming up. He's good. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Bert. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for bringing everyone together on this show. I think we're a lesser mortal, the unexpected life of Sarah B Cochran. Go get it. It's available now on Amazon, all those places, Barnes and Noble, everywhere. Do you think she wanted to levitate everybody, right? I'm not being nuts. I mean it. Like, I think she did. She wanted everyone to levitate out of whatever situation to have a better place. You know?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was fun.
Thank you for joining us here on Big Blend Radio's Way Back When History Podcast. Keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.